All right, well, welcome to this VI course on assimilation. My name is Phil Trollian. I'm the senior pastor of the North Jersey Vineyard Church. That is a church that is located right outside of New York City. I planted it back in 1997, so it's been over 15 years that the church has been going on. And let me give you just a little bit of background how I kind of got into really being into church systems and realizing the importance of developing church systems, which I believe assimilation is I think, top of the list in importance. When I came into the Vineyard, I had a huge paradigm shift. I was an assistant pastor in an evangelical church, and so God brought me into the Vineyard, and it was just awesome as my paradigm was being completely changed. And I came into a church in Manhattan, a Vineyard church in Manhattan that was pastored by a guy named Mike Turigiano, and he became, a spiritual father and the person who kind of vineyardized me, and I learned some really wonderful, incredible things. I learned how to pray for the sick effectively. I learned what it looked like when the Holy Spirit shows up with power. I learned how to hear God's voice. I learned about being naturally supernatural. I began to really understand more and more the importance of worship and what we were looking for in worship. I really valued, everyone gets to play. All of the core Vineyard values, that's our legacy, that's our heritage, that I embrace with everything that I am. And so I started planning the church, and it was a good first couple of years. We got up, we broke the 100 barrier, and just by trying to figure things out and just kind of learning as I went, very much so building, I would say, on Vineyard values, Vineyard core values, we saw the church get up to over 200 people. And but then we kind of got stuck. And I would try lots of different things and try to figure things out, but we'd kind of get up to 250, then go back down to 200, and kind of were there for a little while. And I began to realize that there were some things that I didn't know. There were some things that maybe, I wasn't smart enough to intuit or, whatever, but I needed some help. And there really wasn't, the kind of help that I was looking for wasn't really available within the Vineyard. And so I heard about this guy named Nelson Searcy, who has, become, over the last few years, a real well-known consultant, especially in America, for church growth and for systems. And so when he was just kind of getting started with his kind of church network stuff, he was a pastor in New York City, and my church is just 15 minutes outside of New York City. And so I heard he was doing this coaching network. And the way that worked is it was one day a month for 6 months. And so I would go into the city with Searcy, and there'd be probably about 20 other pastors that were there. It was a Vineyard pastor, a guy who'd been planted out of my church, came with me. And we began to learn about systems, and we would talk about the assimilation system, your small group system, your worship planning system, and eight different systems. And I was like a kid in a candy store. I began thinking through how all of this, I never really had thought like this for my church, and I began to see how crucial this was. And I began immediately, from like the very first session, I began implementing stuff. I began tweaking. I began changing. And, I'm always hesitant to say that anything's like a magic bullet. But as I began to systematically try to improve all of the systems in my church, we started to grow. We actually kind of started to grow significantly. And I won't say that it was only because of the systems, but I certainly know that it had a lot to do with it. Probably, more to do with it than anything else. And so we, over the course of about a year and a half, we more than doubled. We got up to, somewhere between the 400, 450 range, and I just continued to really work on my systems. And I was invited by Searcy to go to what he called an advanced coaching network, and so I did that because I realized that learning how to have effective systems in my church and implementing effective systems and tweaking effective systems was going to be a lifelong process, that this wasn't something I would learn once and then get the systems down and be good to go. So I went to this other network, and in this network there were a lot of pastors of large churches, so that kind of gave me another kind of a forum, a venue to kind of talk about this stuff and see what was working at different levels, and that was really helpful. And so, it was nothing but positive for my church. Really systematically just kind of overhauled all of the major ministries in my church and the way we did it. And there was benefit, there was blessing. And then at the time, it was called the APCL, I think. I was the area pastor for all the New York City vineyards, about a dozen vineyard churches in New York City, in the New York City area. And so I thought, well, this is so good and this is so helpful. Let me make this available to the pastors that are in my area. So I just kind of modeled it after what Cersei had done. I said, well, let's have a 6-month network, and each month we'll talk about different systems. So I invited all of the pastors who were in my area. I reached down into the Philadelphia area a little bit, basically people who were within a 2-hour drive of my church, invited them to come, and I had probably about 20 pastors show up for that. And we spent the next 6 months working through the systems, and I was kind of sharing how I'd been adapting things and having things work in a vineyard context with ministry time and a lot of the values that we have that maybe things that you don't necessarily find in some other churches, and people were really hungry for this. I found that the buy-in within the vineyard was pretty huge. The hunger was there. It was not a problem getting people to come to this. They came every single month. People were saying this is so helpful. They started implementing things right away and felt that there was a benefit. So then after that was done, I was working closely with Phil Stroud. He was the regional overseer at the time, and now he's the national director. And so he's like, this is great. Would you take this to the rest of the region? So then I invited all of the vineyard pastors from Massachusetts and northern Connecticut to a network that I now travel to once a month for 6 months up in Hopkinton, Massachusetts. I think I had invited 20 pastors to that, and 20 pastors showed up. And in that one, 20 pastors showed up in the first month, and I think there were like 20 pastors on the 6th month. So there was a hunger for this. I then proceeded I did another one up in Maine. Then I did one. I kind of covered my whole region. Then I would drive down to Virginia for 6 months. So over the course of a couple years, basically rolled these networks out to my region. And somebody had heard about this, and then they said, hey, there's a bunch of pastors in the Minnesota area who would love for you to come out and do this. And so then I was like, sure, I'll take it out of the region. And so then I'd get on a plane once a month for 6 months and go out to Minnesota. And what struck me about that was, I think over 30 pastors had been invited to it, and like 30 pastors showed up. And I was amazed. There were people, I'm a little bit of an East Coast snob, so I don't necessarily know the geography and the rest of the country. But people were driving like 5 hours to get to it. There were people coming from Wisconsin, and it kind of made me want to make sure that I was doing a really good job. As people were driving, they get up at 4:00 in the morning, drive there for it, go home that night. And again, it was just the same thing. I just saw that within the vineyard, there was a real hunger for this kind of stuff, for kind of raising and increasing our professional acumen. We get the vineyard values, the spiritual side, I think people get that, but people are like, we want help knowing how to just do the kind of the detailed work within our churches. So then what happened, just by way, a little more introduction here. When Phil Stroud became the national director, he asked me if I would come on his executive team because he said, what I want you to do on the national team, on the executive team, is I want you to take what you've been doing in the eastern region, and I want you to figure out a way we can get that to the rest of the country. And so what I did over this past year, I found actually 9 other vineyard pastors who all of them also had gone through the Cersei stuff. And so what that meant, it wasn't that we were just trying to get Cersei stuff disseminated everywhere, but it meant that they were practitioners on church systems. They had been taking some of this, this material, these ideas, these concepts, and trying to figure out how it works in the local church. So and they really, believed in it, saw the importance of it for their church, wanted to get this out to the rest of the vineyard. And most of these guys are APs, they're area pastors. And so over the course of the last year, the first thing we did is we'd have weekly calls where, video calls where we kind of came up with a core curriculum and all got on the same page. And then in February and March of this year, we started rolling out these networks around the country. And so right now, these networks are almost done. Some are finishing up like this month or next month. And we had actually a couple other ones start recently. So I think that we have 10 networks going on right now around the country, and we've got about 100 pastors who are going through these networks. And so we just see that there's a hunger for this. There's a hunger for this stuff, and we're going to talk in this course. We're going to zero in on assimilation. But before we get to assimilation, I want you to just be thinking about the importance of church systems. Because, that was just not language that I was really that aware of. I kind of maybe would hear it thrown around, but I didn't really know what it meant. And now I'm honestly at the point where in my role as a senior pastor, developing effective systems in my church and overseeing them and making sure they're being adapted and tweaked and running effectively is one of the primary things that I do. And so let's think a little bit about church systems. And if you look at your notes, you see where it says having a successful system will help you be more faithful and more fruitful with what God has called you to do. I think that for me, I've definitely seen that having effective systems make me more faithful. And I think every pastor, what you want to hear, what you hope to hear with all the work that we do, what we hope to hear at the end of the day, at the end of our journey, is we want to hear God say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And the one thing that I don't want to hear, and I'm sure I'll hear it in some way, but it'll be loving. But to hear God say, Phil, there's so much more I wanted to do with you and your church, and your heart was good, and you really wanted to see my kingdom come, but there was more that you could have done, that there could have been more of an impact for your church in the community. I don't want to hear that. I want to see the North Jersey Vineyard come to its full redemptive potential. And I think that developing systems can make you more fruitful. See, one of the things about developing a system is that it frees up your time, because pastors have a real tendency to constantly reinvent the wheel. Like we get around to, we know Easter's coming up, and we're like, oh, Easter, there's this great opportunity, and so what are we going to do? And we kind of scramble around, and we come up with something for Easter, and then Easter comes up next year. Maybe this is just me, I don't know, but I think it's more than just me. Then we come to the next Easter, we're like, oh, Easter's coming, what are we going to do? And so we kind of live in that mode where we're reinventing the wheel and just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. But if we develop an effective evangelism system, if we have an effective worship planning system, we're not surprised by Easter. We're not surprised when Christmas, rolls around the same time every year. We know how to use the calendar. We know when people are going back to school and where people are at and what to do at different times. And so then you get a system and you're implementing that system. And so what it does is it frees up your time, because you're not in that scrambling mode. One of the things that I've seen, I've done a lot of work. The primary focus for my team is called the Healthy Church Development Team, is to try to help the smaller churches in the vineyard, defined as the churches that are 150 and less. Those are the ones that we're targeting. And so which is, like more than half of the vineyard churches in the U.S. So it's a big job. So over the last few years, I've spent a lot of time with small churches, with small church pastors. And what I have found, and it's frankly what I had been doing, is that we can let kind of the tyranny of the urgent dominate us. And if we're not intentional about our systems, if we're not intentional about what we're doing, we could spend our time basically dealing with the latest crisis in the church, who's upset with whose marriage is in a bad place, what's blowing up, trying to fix that, and working on our sermons. And that could basically be our system. That could be what we do. We deal with the latest crisis, we work on our sermons, and I just don't think that's not the most effective way to do church. And so a system An effective system will save you, this is kind of a cute way for you to remember here, a system will save you stress, time, energy, and money. Because as we stop just, living, flying by the seat of our pants, reinventing the wheel all the time, we'll find that having a good, effective system will save you stress, time, energy, and money. Now, systems are all over the world that God created. We see the value and the importance of systems, even in how God does things. Right? God had a system when he created the world. He had a system. I mean, he did things on certain days. On the seventh day, he rested. We see that there's clearly a redemptive system from Genesis to Revelation. We see that God has a system and a plan in how he is redeeming the world. You see in Exodus chapter 18, when Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, visits him, and Moses is being overwhelmed with his job as the leader and the judge of the millions of Israelites, Jethro tells him a better system, right? Jethro says, hey, what you need to do, you're killing yourself here. You need to find people, put them over 50s, put them over 100s, put them over 500s, so you don't have to do it all yourself. And so what Jethro did is he helped Moses think through a better system. Jesus, he had a system. He had a system where he gathered the crowds would come, and then from the crowd, he spent time, he handpicked 12 disciples. He spent time with them. He poured into them. Rather than going really wide, he kind of narrowed it down to these 12. Even within the 12, he had 3. He had Peter, James, and John. And so that was his system for expanding the church, expanding the kingdom. And so then out of these followers that he spent a lot of time with, then when the Holy Spirit came in the beginning of Acts, we see that the church exploded. It was a system that really worked. And, here we are 2,000 years later, we see that was a good system. The early church had a system for expansion. It was Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, then the ends of the earth. They had a system, they had a strategy, they had a plan. And so, and I could, there's a lot more examples, but just by way of introduction, this isn't some, kind of a crazy new idea. But even beyond, the Bible and God's dealing in the world, we see that effective systems are a huge part of the world that we live in. Think about your body. Your body has 12 systems. I won't list them all, but your body has a skeletal system. It has a circulatory system. There's a muscular system, nervous system, respiratory system, immune system, cardiovascular system, a bunch of other systems. And when you have health, that means that all 12 of your systems are working well. All 12 of your systems are functioning. Now, if you have 11 systems working really well, but your cardiovascular system is not doing well, you're in trouble, right? I mean, even though the other systems are going well, that cardiovascular system, that's a pretty important system, or your immune system, that's a pretty important system. And so when you have all of your systems working well, you have health, and when you don't, you have disease. Some other examples, even like looking at history about systems. I always talk about John Wesley and George Whitefield, because I think that is, the two of them are a great example of the power of effective systems. Because Wesley and Whitefield, they were the leaders, the leading preachers of the Great Awakening that happened in England in the 18th century. And according to everybody, Whitefield was much more of the superstar. Whitefield was the one, he had the crowds, everybody wanted to hear George Whitefield. He was eloquent, he was powerful, he was all over England and came over to the United States. But John Wesley is the one who had the greater impact over time. John Wesley, a lot of people don't know who George Whitefield is. Pastors know who George Whitefield is, but the average person never heard of him. But a lot of people have heard of John Wesley because he was the founder of Methodism. See, Wesley had a method. Wesley had a system. And so Wesley's method or Wesley's system is what created Methodism, which is, one of the larger denominations even today. Another example of a successful system is McDonald's. Now, maybe that's not successful for health, but it's successful for, making money, creating a billion-dollar empire. And so McDonald's started with these two brothers, the McDonald brothers. And they just had a hamburger joint. That's all they had. And, I guess they had good hamburgers. But then Ray Kroc came along. And Ray Kroc systematized what the McDonald's brothers had created. And so now you have this worldwide empire. And the thing about McDonald's, it doesn't matter which McDonald's you go into, anywhere in this country, even anywhere in the world, you know that you're in a McDonald's, you know what you're getting. And they take, high school students and they train them in their system, though that's changing now. It's now, it's not just high school students who need to work at McDonald's, unfortunately. But they train them to basically know how to prepare massive quantities of food on a daily basis because they have really effective systems. In our lives, we have systems, right? If you think about, hopefully, one of the systems that you have for your life is your devotional system, right? If you're going to have effective devotions, if you're going to spend a daily quiet time with God, the reason that you're able to be successful in day after day after day meeting with God and deepening your relationship with Him is because you have some sort of a system. If you're just kind of leaving it to fly by the seat of your pants or to just pray when you feel like it, you probably don't have a super rich devotional life. But you have a system. Maybe you get up in the morning, you go and you get your cup of coffee, and you sit down with your Bible and your cup of coffee and you have your quiet time. Or, maybe you go for a walk at your lunch hour. But when it's consistent and when it's growing, it's because you're executing a system. Same thing with, say exercising. If you have a period in your life where you're getting to the gym or you're going running or you're biking, everybody wants to exercise more. Most people want to exercise more, but very few people do it on a regular basis. And the ones who do it are the people who have systematized it. They get up in the morning, they, have that cup of coffee and a banana, then they go out and they run their 6 miles. Or, maybe what they do is they lay their clothes out, that they're going to run in or go to the gym in. They get their gym bag ready the night before. They get up. They get out of bed, they do it, they go on their lunch hour, they go first thing after work, they drive straight to the gym. And one of the things that you've probably experienced, I know I have, is I'll have a great system for running. I'm a runner, so that's what I do. I'll have a great system for running, but then when I go on vacation or when I travel and my system is messed up, then you can find you get back into your regular world and then you're not doing it anymore. You fall out of the system that you had created because you got away from the pattern, the system that you'd been doing. Even getting ready in the morning. You have a system, I'm sure that you probably don't think about it, but you have, things that you do. You put your clothes out the night before, maybe you iron them the night before. You get up and you brush your teeth and then you do this and then you do that. You have, I have 3 teenage daughters at home. They have an elaborate system to get ready in the morning, and that is a system that I'm not able to penetrate. I'm not able to do what I need to do because they take over the whole house in getting ready. So systems we see clearly, are an important part of life. And we see, if you think about it, if we want success in anything for the long haul, it's going to be connected and correlated to the system that we've developed for what it is we're trying to accomplish. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about systems. So why develop systems? Why develop systems specifically for a church or a ministry or whatever it is you're involved in? First is that a developed system is a document of faith. A developed system is a document of faith. Jesus a lot used language when he was healing people, and he would say things like he said in Matthew chapter 9, verse 29. It says where the two blind men came to Jesus and they cried out for healing. And it says, Jesus touched the eyes of the 2 blind men and said, "Be it done according to your faith." So faith is important. And when you develop a system, your system is a statement of faith. See, we're going to work for the next few hours, we're going to be working on developing an assimilation system. An assimilation system is a statement of faith. You are saying that you expect that God is going to send new people to your church, and because you expect that God is going to do this, you are developing a plan for what you're going to do when these new people come into your church. And so that is absolutely a faith-filled proposition. Maybe you're going to develop an evangelism system. And that is, you know what? You are going to believe God that people are going to come to your church and they are going to begin to follow Jesus. They're going to find the life of the kingdom. And so, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do when those people come that you believe God is going to send you, or that you believe that God is going to lead you to? What is your plan for discipleship? What is your plan to equip your people with the tools that they need so that they can go and they can effectively share their faith, be inviters and includers, and know how to pray for people? Can I pray for you right now? What is your plan for that? These small groups, you believe that God, is going to make great community in your church, that lonely people are going to be able to come to your church and get connection. God puts the lonely in a family, it says in the Psalms. So your system for small groups is a statement of faith. It is a statement that says, I believe that God is going to create this system of small groups where people are going to find community, they're going to develop friends, they're going to grow in their faith, they're going to learn how to do the stuff. So it shows when we sit down and we develop a system, it shows that we are expecting God to do things. Second thing about why we develop system is that a successful system provides structure. A successful system provides structure. And we need structure. If we want to see a church come into everything that God has for it, we probably need more structure than we're wired for. Now, when I first began pastoring, or actually, even going back before that, I took a Myers-Briggs test. And I'm assuming you guys know it. It's a personality inventory that lets you know whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, whether you're intuitive or sense-oriented, whether you're a thinker or a feeler, whether you're a judge or a perceiver. And so you get like four letters that just kind of in an uncanny way explains your life and kind of tells you what you're about. So when I was in my early 20s, I did a Myers-Briggs test, and I came out an ENFP. That means I'm extroverted, and I'm intuitive, kind of go with my heart. And then the P means that I'm a perceiver. In other words, it means I like to make things up as I go along. I like to wing it. I like to, build the boat on the water, that kind of a thing. And I was a hardcore P. It's like if there was like a scale of 1 to 20, I was a 20. I mean, there was no J anywhere near that. A couple of years ago, I took one again. It was part of a spiritual gifts inventory and a class that we had, and I took it again, and I found out that I am now an ENFJ. And so I changed. Now, my thinking, I don't think my basic personality changed, but I think that what happened is that, years of being a senior pastor, I think the Myers-Briggs test, it judges what you value. And I had, after years of doing this, I really value structure. And the J, it means judging, and it means that you want to have things organized. You want to get all your ducks in a row. And so I realized that I changed over the course of years of being a senior pastor. I changed because I realized how much I needed structure. See, if people are going to follow you, they need structure. You know what? It might work for you that you can wing it, that you can make it up as you go along, and that's what I did in my 20s and early on in my ministry. I was just kind of winging it, and it was kind of working. But I reached a point where it wasn't working anymore because I was comfortable with winging it, with flying by the seat of my pants, but my people weren't, or the majority of my people weren't. See, if you are comfortable making it up as you go along and, just winging it, you're a little bit crazy because most people aren't like that. Most people need some sense of structure. Maybe you can live with the mess, but people can't. And so the greatest gift that we can give people who we're asking to come with us and to come alongside of us and build a church with us, the greatest thing that we can give them is clarity of progress. Because people want to know if they're doing a good job. We're asking people in a church setting who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, raising kids, doing all the, the crazy stuff that life throws at you. And so they are sacrificing their time to serve in the church. And they want to know that what they're doing is making a difference. And so if we can give that structure, if we can give that clarity of progress and say, here's what we're shooting for, here's what we're going for, here's what means that we're moving the ball down the field, then they're going to be able to feel much better about what it is they're doing and what it is they're sacrificing. And you'll have more people going along with you. You'll have more people pulling in the same direction. So a successful system provides structure. Another thing, developing a system forces you to think on paper. It forces you to think on paper. I love this quote by Francis Bacon. It says, "Reading makes a full man, conversation a ready man, writing an exact man." And I think that is, I just find that so true, right? I mean, one of the things I always tell pastors is, leaders are readers. that we need to constantly be reading, filling ourselves with best practices. I always tell people, you have someone who has lived a full life of ministry, where they've seen and experienced things and learned things over 50 years, and they take everything that they learned in ministry and they put it in a book, and you can buy that book for $9.99 on your Kindle, and get 50 years of experience in a book. I mean, how do we have to avail ourselves of that wonderful stuff? And so you read stuff and you get full of a lot of things. You get full of ideas, I mean, I'm full of ideas. And then the way that we kind of work out our ideas is we talk with people. In college, especially, everyone thinks that they kind of know everything that's wrong with the world. And so you have these late night sessions in your dorm and everyone's just talking through what they believe and what they think. And so that's where you start to process. Maybe you have an idea that's been in your head, and then you put it out there in a conversation and you realize, well, that's stupid. That doesn't make any sense. And you begin to kind of understand a little bit more what you believe, what you think is important. Then when you get to the place of writing, as Bacon said, writing an exact man. So you have a lot of ideas about what you want to see in your church. You have a lot of dreams. You have visions that God has given you. You talk and you read and it's out there. When you sit down and you do a system, when you write out a system with a bunch of people, I'll get to that in a minute, but when you write out a system, what you're doing is you're taking all the wonderful stuff that's swirling around in your head and you're putting it on paper and saying, okay, this is what it's going to look like. Here are the major objectives that we want to achieve. Here are the significant steps that we're going to take to achieve this objective. Here are our values. Here are our priorities. Here's what we want to see happen. And so when you sit down and you actually work through a system, it enables you to take your thinking and really make it exact. And that kind of leads to the next one. A system provides focus. A system provides focus. Now, I'm here in a room with lights that aren't exactly super focused. Most of the time in churches, I've got these lights here. These lights are very focused. There's like spotlights that are on me, lights for the stage, for the filming. They're very focused. But the fluorescent lights up there, they're not focused at all. They're just kind of, just going out all over the place. And so they provide a little bit of light, but not that much, not that much power. But if you take a light, like in these stage lights, and you focus it, like I can look at the fluorescent lights and it doesn't hurt my eyes. If I look at that light, I'm like, whoa, now I can't, now I'm seeing spots. Now, you could actually take light and really focus it intensely and make a laser beam. And so now you're taking that focused light and you can cut through steel. And I think it's a same principle there for us in our churches, that we want to focus. We don't want to shoot at a million different things. We don't want to be, the way a lot of us do church is it's ready, aim, fire. We don't want to do ministry that way. We want, what has God called us to do? What God has called us to do by creating a healthy local church in a community that holds out the gospel, that is a hard thing to do. And so we want to focus. We want to say, what has God called us to? What are the best practices we can do to accomplish what God has put in our heart? And one of the things that I always encourage people is that I think there's two lists that you need to have. And as you think through this your assimilation system over the next couple sessions here, and whenever you go to a conference or anything like that, it's good to have two lists. One is a list of things that you're going to stop doing, and the other is a list of things that you're going to start doing. Because you might be doing some things in your church, and you know what? There was a ministry that went on in your church, and at some point it really served its purpose, but that purpose has passed. And you might have some people, they love it, it's their pet ministry, they want to keep it going, but you realize this isn't really where we're going, this isn't the most effective use of time and energy. And so maybe you need to have like a nice funeral for that thing and just, kind of be like, hey, let's praise God for all the wonderful things that have happened with this ministry, and we thank God for it, but now it's time to move on. And so things that you're going to stop and then things that you're going to start. And the system really helps you do that and helps you focus on what it is God's called you to do. Another thing is that a system is good for your team. A system is good for your team. Have you ever said with somebody that you're working with, well, I don't think we're on the same page. I don't think we're on the same page. And what that means is that I think you have some goals and objectives that are different than the goals and objectives that I have. And so when you develop a system, and I always encourage people to develop a system with others, don't do it alone, What that does is that enables all of you to get on the same page. You get on the same page. You realize what it is. You hash through your values. You hash through what God is calling you to do. You work it out, and you come up with a system where you all say, "Yeah, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to pull together." I was preaching a couple weeks ago, and I used this example of something I'd heard about that happened in a state fair in upstate New York. I guess this is kind of a common thing at state fairs. I'm kind of a city person. I don't go to that many state fairs, but they would do these things called horse pulling contests. And in a horse pulling contest, they hook a horse up to a load, and they see how much a horse can pull. And that sounds kind of like a cruel thing. I don't know if the ASPCA is too crazy about this going on. I showed a picture of this in church when I was preaching on it, and there were like some animal lovers in the congregation. I just lost them at that point. They were just so sad. But so this one horse was able to pull like 700 pounds. And so then the horse that eventually won was able to pull 800 pounds, had a load of 800 pounds, was able to go the required distance for it. So then what they did is they put the two horses together, and they said, well, let's see how much weight the two horses can pull together. Now, if you do the simple math, you think, well, okay, one could pull 800, the other could pull 700, they could pull 15. That's easy math. But these two horses together were able to pull 2,200 pounds. And so I think we see like an important principle there, that we can go a lot further, a lot longer together than we can go alone. And I think that having a clear system is something that is so good for your team and so good for getting everybody pulling in the same direction. A couple other things here. A system saves you time. A system saves you time. There's a kind of a business guru, production, management guy, Brian Tracy. He says, for every minute you spend planning, you save 10 minutes in execution. So to use the example that I used before, how I used to, like, Easter's coming, oh no, and the thing about Easter is they move the date all the time. Sometimes it's in March, sometimes it's in April. It can surprise you as to when it is. And so the amount of time that I would have to spend scrambling wasn't really very productive, nor was it very, very effective. But now that I have a system for where that fits in our calendar, I find that we're able to do a lot more with a lot less effort. It does not take as much time to do it. So it'll save you time. A system makes it easier to ask others for help. People will say no to what's confusing. Maybe you're a pastor and you're asking people to help, you're asking people to get on board, you're asking people to join different ministry teams, and maybe you're really frustrated that people are saying no. And so it's very easy for us to just get jaded and to get upset and to say, like, oh, these people, if only they would love Jesus, then they would, show up and do what needs to be done. But maybe the problem isn't with them. Maybe the problem is that what you're asking them to do is not really clear. And people will say no to what's confusing. If they don't understand it, if they don't understand what's being asked of them, if they don't understand the whys behind it, then they might not get on board. So I bet you'll find that if you develop these systems and people understand specifically what it is you're asking them to do and the reasons for that you're asking them to do this, that it's not just busy work, I think that you will find that more people will get on board. More people will say, hey, that makes sense. I want to commit to that. I want to do that. And then finally, for this section, not having effective systems will limit your church's growth. Not having and that's that's kind of the lead here in this whole idea. But not having effective systems will limit your church's growth. And here's what I've seen. As I've traveled around to lots of different churches that are growing, churches that are really impacting their community, they have systems. Now, as we go into the assimilation system, I'm going to talk about principles, but I'm also going to show you a lot of really specific things that you can do. But you don't have to. I'm not at all going to say that this is the only way that your church is going to grow, this is the only way your church is going to assimilate people, is if you do everything that I do. But what I do know is that if you don't do something intentional for your assimilation system that is fleshing out these values in your context, it is going to seriously limit your church's growth. Every growing church that I've been to, and when I talk to the senior pastor and I ask, how do you do this, how do you do that, they have systems. They have systems that work. And as I said before, the majority of the pastors of small or struggling churches are just kind of winging it, are just kind of caught up in that pattern of dealing with the latest crisis and preparing a sermon and just kind of, just reinventing the wheel all the time. And so I want to challenge you. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in the next section. But I want to challenge you, especially if you're a senior pastor, especially if you're a church planter, or whatever ministry whatever it is your end goal is here in VI, whether it's to be a staff pastor, whether it's or lead up some nonprofit or whatever, that your ministry will be more effective, will be very much more effective if you commit yourself to developing systems and thinking through the systems for what you're trying to do. All right, we're gonna stop there, and we'll pick it up at the next section.